Perspective now from ABC News' chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl, who wrote about much of this in a fascinating book, Betrayal, the Final Act of the Trump Show. So there are a lot of details in your book about conversations about invoking the 25th Amendment. How serious were they? Where did they start? Who talked to whom?
I mean, to me, the most amazing revelation was the conversations included the two most senior people in Trump's cabinet at the time, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin and the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. And these were not only the two most senior people left in the cabinet, you had so many acting secretaries, they were also two total Trump loyalists. Right. And I learned, had a conversation sometime late in the evening on January 6th where they talked about the 25th Amendment. Obviously, it was a path that was not taken, but the mere fact that they were even raising this as a possibility, and think about what it means. You're removing a president because you are declaring him mentally unfit to be in office. And now we've learned subsequently from the January 6 hearings, testimony of Cassidy Hutchinson and others, that there was real fear that option could be pursued, and they were using that as a way to pressure Trump to finally come out and give a statement to condemn the riot.
And Sean Hannity, in a text, I think it was to Mark Meadows, yes, also said 25th Amendment, or maybe to Kayleigh McEnany, or I can't remember whom, was saying 25th Amendment talk is real. But obviously it fizzled out. I mean, do you know how serious anybody was about it?
Well, the most serious it got is I was told that Pompeo actually asked a lawyer to kind of explain how it all worked. And so they got to the point of at least looking into what the process would be. I think they pretty quickly realized it was not going to work. First of all, you had cabinet secretaries resign. You had DeVos resign, Elaine Chao resign. So obviously those would have been two votes for invoking the 25th Amendment, and they were now gone. And there was also a problem because the law is not entirely clear about whether or not acting secretaries would be included. Would they be included, first of all, in the total that you need a majority of? Would they have the right to vote? And Trump had so many acting secretaries, they knew that whatever route you chose, it would be subject to legal challenge. So if you included the acting, Trump could challenge it legally. The process of arguing out in court, he only had 2 weeks left in office. So that's why it fizzled out. It was going to take too much time.
It would be fascinating just to know the details of it, because, I mean, it's the kind of thing of, it's like planning a coup against somebody. You're trying to figure out who's thinking the same thing.
And who's going to rat you out?
Who's going to rat you out? Yeah. It's also unclear now if Pompeo talks to the January 6th committee, how forthcoming he might be.
Yeah,
given, I mean, he has his own presidential ambitions.
Which is complicated, because first of all, he's got his own presidential ambitions, and he wants to run as the candidate of the Trump movement. But he also wants to run for president, and one person that would stand in the way is Donald Trump. So it's complicated. But I'm fascinated to see what Pompeo will say, assuming they actually get him to come in. He takes the oath. How does he answer the question? Because as I was reporting on this, I tried desperately to get to him, to ask him about this, and I kept on getting pushed off. His spokesperson, at first said, "Oh, no, I can't, nothing ever happens. Can you tell me that on the record? I'll put it in. Give me a denial. I'll put it in." And no, then suddenly my calls weren't returned for literally months. I had my last conversation for the book with Donald Trump over the phone, and I asked him about this. He said, "Oh, that's ridiculous. Never happened." And I said, "Well, why has Mike Pompeo not denied it?"
And how did you respond to that?
Well, he didn't really. That's totally nonsense. And then I got a call within an hour of Trump hanging up, and he did hang up on me in that conversation at the end of the call, from a spokesperson for Mike Pompeo, who had been avoiding me for months, saying, "Okay, I've got something for you." From a spokesperson, he wouldn't allow me to use his name with the statement. From a spokesperson, it never happened. There were no conversations about the 25th Amendment. There were. So it'll be interesting to see what he says when his hand's on the Bible. And
do you think he could offer valuable testimony?
I think first of all on that, hearing directly from him, and I know they've also spoken to Mnuchin. Again, they didn't pursue it, so there's that. But the mere fact that his two top guys talked about it as a possibility is an amazing insight into how worried they were that Trump had completely lost control. So that'll be interesting. But he is a total Trump loyalist. But I think one other thing he can talk about is the concern that the Pentagon had gone off the rails. Remember, Trump had fired the civilian leadership of the Pentagon, put in a group of people that were like he believed were total loyalists. And I know that Pompeo, another thing that I reported in the book is that Pompeo at one point called Bill Barr saying, I'm really worried about what's going on at the Pentagon. I mean, there was concerns about strikes against Iran.
Right.
What would Trump try to do during this lame duck period? You know, how would he, create an international crisis as a way to stay in power? There were real concerns. And Pompeo at one point called Barr and asked him about that. I learned that directly from the other side of that conversation, so it'll be interesting to see if Pompeo will acknowledge that.
Fascinating. Jonathan Karl, thanks so much.
Thanks, Anderson.
More now on the new Justice Department reporting and what it might signal about how far prosecutors are willing to go and how hard they're preparing to fight to get there. CNN's Caitlin Polans has been talking to her sources, joins us now. Walk us through this potential Justice Department court battle over executive privilege.
Right, so Anderson, today we are learning that the Justice Department is gearing up to get ready to go to court as they're investigating for possible criminality, January 6th and the presidency. And so one of the things that Evan Perez, another reporter here, and I were learning today from several sources is that what the Justice Department prosecutors and investigators want to get access to now is conversations that Donald Trump was having in the White House in the days before January 6th and January 6th itself. And so what's happening here, the reason this is arising is that there are two people who went to the grand jury in recent weeks, Mark Short, Greg Jacob, both worked under Mike Pence in the office of the vice president, and they had certain things that they couldn't talk about. Either they negotiated before going into the grand jury, they think that those things might be off limits because Donald Trump might want to claim privilege, or they went to the grand jury and they declined to answer the questions. And so now we are seeing the Justice Department leading up to a moment where they're going to want to challenge these executive privilege claims that Donald Trump might try to make to get them wiped away so that they aren't standing in the way from gaining those facts from witnesses like Short and Jacob. And so this would take it into a new aggressive phase because we just haven't seen a court battle like this related to January 6th and the powers of the presidency, the separation of powers.
The question, of course, is how long that court battle might take. That's always been one of the things when the question was, would the January 6th committee, bring people to court on executive privilege claim?
That's right. And so right now, it could take a long time. The courts move slowly in some instances, fast in others. In a criminal investigation like this, there are lots of judges out there that would say, yes, we would want to move very fast on something like this. But what this does tell us as where things stand right now is that with Mark Short and Greg Jacob going into the grand jury already, not answering all the questions, clearly prosecutors don't have all the answers here and don't have everything they want out of this piece of the investigation. So there would be a ways to go to figure this out and then potentially get more information. And then we also are learning about a lot of other investigative work that the Justice Department is doing, that they're obtaining the cell phone of John Eastman now. As of July 12th, they're getting to look into the contents of that. We just also reported tonight that someone working with Jeffrey Clark, who was helping Trump at the Justice Department, that he was searched. His name is Ken Klukowski. He's become a cooperator. And then also that the Justice Department is nailing down what Cassidy Hutchinson, that key witness in the House Select Committee investigation, what she had to say, that she's now also in touch with the Justice Department investigator. So it's all coming together, but we don't really know where it's going or how long it will take.
Just finally on the executive privilege things, and I'm not sure anybody knows this, but if it's Mark Short's claims of executive privilege that goes to court, and a judge rules one way or the other, does that ruling extend to all other people in the former president's orbit and their claims of executive privilege, or would the Justice Department have to bring each individual's claims to court?
Well, we would have to see how this case itself would play out. There's lots of different postures, but in this sort of circumstance, it actually would be Donald Trump's claim of executive privilege. And we've been through court cases like this in the past. in the Nixon administration, in the Clinton administration, there really hasn't been one litigated about a former president trying to make a claim that's different than the sitting president, where Joe Biden is saying they're not going to assert privilege. But in this particular situation, in the Nixon administration, they tried to keep the tapes of Watergate, the Watergate tapes, private from the grand jury. The court said no, there wasn't going to be executive privilege protecting that. And then it came up again twice in the Clinton administration. There was a White House lawyer who wanted to claim some privileges. The courts ultimately didn't side with the White House in those circumstances either.
Interesting.
And so our reporting, Anderson, is that there are officials overseeing this investigation who believe that when the Justice Department brings this and litigates it, they will ultimately win.
That would be huge. Caitlin Polans, thank you very much. Appreciate it.